So, this is Shirley with Sirius Tallest Moon. This is Venus Hour, Mars Day. Venus is 22 in Cancer in the 7th house. And, well, what prompted me to press record is this video. I don't have the rights to that video, but basically, United States offers Zelensky no NATO membership and even discourages Zelensky to come off the idea that he'll be a part of NATO. But they offer to protect Ukraine in a NATO-like security. This sparks up an immediate response from your broadcaster's exiled podcast, NATO natal chart, because there's just something very interesting on the structural maneuvers that's happening, and it reminded me almost of um, the first weeks um, in, in Rutte's acceptance of NATO and entering NATO as the Secretary General. So why am I saying that? Because there is a structural issue at hand, and this structural issue, while Saturn of NATO is uh, absolutely not yet pinpointed or anywhere near pinpointed, the new moon in Virgo is going to be adjacent to that Saturn of NATO. It's not a Saturn return. It's not anything that pinpoint that Saturn. And that's why it came a little bit of a surprise to me that I associate with Uranus being in Gemini and the polarities within NATO. But it's also the push and pull relations between President Trump and the desire to kind of hold NATO on a leash, and hold Zelensky on a leash. You got to stand up to the fact that Zelensky, whether we like him or not, managed to, by circumstances or whatnot, pull the strings on the entire international community, East and West, whether it was the manufactured cables for the Geely car in China that stopped trade dead in its tracks when the Ukraine war began back in 2022, and or whether it's the up jump of the 5%, where definitely Zelensky was kind of like the hook to get people to spend a significant amount of their GDP on NATO, not just on security through NATO. And with the United States having NATO since 1949, with the CIA, with the Vatican, it's kind of digital pet, kind of a Tamagotchi that you constantly have to feed. And that Tamagotchi kept MK Ultra Global, that kept projects that are targeted individuals, surveillance, and a lot of things that definitely did America a lot when it comes to maintaining its force in the global arena. But it also was costly. Okay, it also was something that Americans spent quite a lot of, and there's a desire to hold that NATO at arm's length, and to hold Zelensky at arm's length, because Zelensky, being a leader of a country that stands in between Russia and the West, is a juncture while still being in Europe. Israel, for example, is not in Europe. Okay, it's not a European state. It's a juncture between the East and the West, quite an important one. It has other things going for and against it, like its funding, okay? But it's not the juncture that Ukraine plays, that Finland, for example, doesn't play. Finland doesn't have this ability to pressure Donald Trump in a way that, if Donald Trump takes over the Arctic, Finland becomes nullified together with Sweden and Norway, and Great Britain. so so that might explain why Trump and Putin met in Alaska, and that also might explain the desire to play seven hands and keep both NATO at arm's length and Zelensky at arm's length, while not wanting to deprive Zelensky of protection and pave the path for United States to rejuvenate its alliance or lack of alliance with Europe, as Germany is being again the highest contributor to NATO alliance when it comes to the money line, and that kind of creates a structural situation that can allow for a growing division between the EU in general and Germany in particular and the United States. And there is a desire perhaps to keep Zelensky at arm's length, so not to deprive him to go, I don't know, to China or to whomever to seek protection, but also not to completely assuage to Ukraine, and definitely while doing that, distinguishing United States from its close relations with NATO, while asking for the EU countries to spend more on NATO, and it puts NATO in a position here where Zelensky doesn't have to have NATO to have protection, and that means that the entire 5% of the European country is putting the entire Europe in a situation where there is this Ukraine issue. They definitely don't want it to be, they don't want it to spread from Ukraine onwards, which it already does by the merit of refugees coming from Ukraine to Europe. And on the other hand, it can individuate Europe to make its own decisions. Still, it will need to tackle Russia and now also the United States. So when I think about, hey, what's going on in this NATO chart, this Saturn Neptune in the 8th house of NATO both increased the funding, and there was an almost 1 year long crusade to increase the spending and raise it to the 5%, while now we have kind of the cashing in on that, which is, hey, Zelensky is looking for protection that doesn't necessitate NATO, so he has the interest to not be dependent on being a NATO member state, as well as Trump has the interest of having a pet country in Europe that is at the very important juncture that can stop not only Russia but also Germany. And it's kind of like, but then Cuba Missile Crisis, if United States puts something in Ukraine, but we also have Russia invested within NATO territory for the very reason. And that creates an almost Yugoslavia type of global structure that when that is lit, it's not looking pretty. So I've just been watching this summer, not summer, vacay, and the atmosphere has been many attempts to keep things from growing. Okay, the overall atmosphere is, and it is both the bad things from growing and the good things from growing. There is an overall kind of letting go of completely annihilating, whether it's Ukraine or Zelensky or okay, letting go of complete annihilation, but at the same time trying to keep something at arm's length, which is not compatible with the sovereignty that people are longing for. Yet Saturn in Aries is a structure that changes the structure of sovereignty. Okay, it changes the structure of sovereignty. People are going to at first be more local and then want to have kind of like a global village. Even with the astrology, people wanting to live in a place that is actually good for them, independent of the country, and they need to have whatever entities or legal entities they're under to be supportive of them. We saw that with the expat culture, and then the astrocartography culture that is growing. Okay, the small trajectory will be more localized, but we are going to a global village, and even beyond that. And in the midst of it, we have polarities in NATO. We have making a mess of the structure of the world in a way that both provides opportunity and challenges, okay, a lot of things. So there is an overall type of, hey, we're not supposed to be arguing on that small territory, or we're not supposed to, for example, Trump's telling Zelensky to give up Crimea, to kind of like cut his losses short. It's kind of like, you're going to be protected, but I got to leave you there to Russia. It's also U.S. interest to have some, military basements there, that they're not just for Cuba Missile Crisis to Russia, but also Cuba Missile Crisis to Germany. And it is Germany. It's the same Germany. I mean, Macron is fantastic at diplomatic relations. He doesn't carry those aspirations. And I think with acknowledging the Palestinian state, he shows that he's not in, like, France is big enough, okay, and have big enough problems. And he's aware he's going to have to converse with China, while Germany perhaps is still dreaming of that a completely independent power that can compete with China, Russia, US, and the rest of Europe. While Netherlands still holds the juristic precision, the Goodell point of jurisdiction when it comes to war crimes, and Brussels is the home of the EU and the home of NATO, and no longer the home of the true. That was ravished. um, uh, but uh, but when I look at the atmosphere, there's definitely a sort of stagnation where the desire to keep people on a small leash is not suffice. People want more, and they are right to want more. They don't want to stay in that stagnation, and they're also well aware that the tactics that have been used to get them to stay in that stagnation or to stay on a small leash are tactics that in themselves are buried a very right, very correct bubble pop, um, because those were tactics to keep the discourse polarizing between two distinct things, and that might have worked when Rahu was in Gemini, but this time we have Uranus, and but we also have Saturn, so it's a very challenging type of Uranus in Gemini. Um, it's kind of like, hey, it's going well but stagnant. Okay, and this is and the very important understanding that this situation is man-made, so that we will just desire stagnation. That's not compatible with Aries. Aries, even with Saturn in Aries, desires to move forward and to create something that stands the test of time, not by mitigating, but by actually taking the Saturn energy to better elect, better plan, um, uh, reshuffle the building blocks, but definitely not stop that in the tracks, not stay at arm length. This is also incompatible to where the world is going. So when it comes to NATO, I see that eighth house is being highly activated, but also the second house, there is a collision of values. Okay, the question of being able to fund for the values um, of NATO, even when it comes to the economic values. There is the polarity within the leadership, um, and and we even see that the maneuvering of Donald Trump um, has its limitations, while everybody doesn't necessarily desire for Zelensky to get a NATO position that is going to cost everyone a lot of their GDP. But also because when once Ukraine is in NATO, nobody will be able to ignore its stand, and it's going to definitely threaten the place of Germany because it has a border. You know, just like Israel has a border with the Middle East that was fought over, and that was a strategic placement that we couldn't get with Uganda. So is Ukraine. Okay, so this is something that everybody wants Ukraine in a quantum state. Everybody wants Ukraine not too strong, not too weak, and on a global war type of mitigation steps. I have to argue that this is not unfounded or unjust. It's not about Zelensky. It's about the structure of power, and this is a country that has a very good point of argumentation that other countries wouldn't necessarily have. Okay, when we think about the dissolution of the Soviet Union, creating a wall of protection of countries that are quasi-European and becoming more and more part of NATO, this takes away the glory of the main pillars, France, Germany, even Netherlands, and lo and behold, might be even the country that is not there, but nothing goes without it, and that is Switzerland, Italy, okay, because that is the wall of protection against Putin, has a lot of pressure points on the global economy. That's very likely how they got to their sovereignty from the Soviet Union. But once they are sovereign, there's a gigantic desire to keep these countries at arm's length because they do pose tremendous amount of threat to the classical Europe, um, when it because now it's those countries, those big giants, Poland, Germany, they're no longer at the juncture. Austria, they're no longer at the juncture where it's them or a Russian Europe. So meanwhile, there's polio spreading in Europe, which is very likely predicted, military operation or not, this very likely predicted at this time. Um, yes, I haven't seen the colors of Sirius. I'm waiting for my European colleagues to see if they saw the colors of Sirius. What does it say about Europe? But some of my colleagues that talk about it are already associated with the Eastern Bloc, and that is missing information astrologically because they might not be able to freely broadcast on these affairs, and that's understandable. Um, and Chiron is on the row of Chiron and Aries on the row of NATO, emphasizing the importance of the disincluded countries. So whether it's Bosnia and Herzegovina, whether it's Estonia, Lithuania, um, Finland even, okay, the inclusivity, and if Zelensky joins in, this basically kind of shuts the door on the classical European countries, and the entire balance of power within NATO changes and transforms completely, so that the countries that didn't have all that much of a voice now will have way more of a voice than, and now other countries run the risk of being disincluded because they no longer stand at the boots on ground juncture between Russia and the West. This is bad news for Germany. Okay, this is bad news for Germany. Um, and yes, I don't have the enough political depth to get into what would be the antidote. Europe is comprised of many countries, so astrologically it's very, very difficult. And the EU chart is together with the euro, kind of like what would be with Orion Declaration of Independence if it would be tomorrow. But I decided to postpone that date for personal reasons, personal astrological considerations, um, more things that are aligning as we speak. Um, the quasi stellium in the quasi stellium in Cancer, activating the moon in this chart, and the moon is conjoining Uranus again, emphasizing on the polarities. Um, so certain countries. And then is the question: is the structure dissolving? I think that the structure is changing. I think it's getting Yugoslavia type of misery for the borders of power and influence, um, which can actually play in favor of NATO turning it into a Gaza Strip in terms of trying to conquest or conquer EU territories, because it's just going to be so mixed and so crowded and so. Um, but it might also turn Europe into an open air ghetto. Okay, because there are going to be U.S. forces very likely in Ukraine. That's probably going to stay there, while diluting the Crimea question was probably not going to be diluted easily, especially not for when certain Dutch leaders are thinking, and Belgian leaders are thinking to transfer part of Belgium back to Netherlands. It's a Dutch-speaking part, but alongside with that, there may be a desire to do an exit, which would be a chain of countries wanting to break apart from the EU, which very likely entails a part of NATO, and that is beyond challenging. Okay, that is beyond challenging. To keep a small country small in that atmosphere can only be through an alliance. And while the European countries are beginning to fund for an alliance, having a polio pandemic is going to largely decrease their ability to stand in the 5% that they promised by 2030. And this prompts the question, okay, and who is going to look into those questions when it comes to okay, the very situationship with United States and its allies is also a question. Okay, so now it's getting complicated for NATO. I don't necessarily see a dissolution. Okay, but we do have. With the eclipses in September, it's going to be in the 7th house of Navo, and they play a tremendous emphasis on the partners and enemies of NATO. And the Palestinian state, for example, the reason everybody wanted to destroy Hamas is very strong on the Virgo Pisces axis. And personally, I think that the chart for Hamas is beyond horrid. Okay, that's what they're. It's a very difficult to. It's kind of like it's something that's difficult to live with and difficult to divorce, okay, and difficult to destroy. I really hope for Palestinians they will have something better than Hamas for anything, okay. Just as an astrologer, okay, simply as an astrologer. Um, and I don't have charts of the IDF, for example, so I don't know. It was the organization that won over. There was Lehi, Etzel, Agana, and then the IDF was either comprised of them or I don't know the history, so I can't make an opinion. And then I would kind of need to do it from someplace else probably if I did even look at the chart. So, but I invite people who, if you have charts for IDF, then that would be interesting to look at. I don't know. Okay. So, but to put it simply, for a Palestinian state to exist, it definitely needed the Pisces Virgo axis out when it came to Hamas. They might keep that axis, but with better placements. This may have been associated with the reason Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, because he was a Pisces ascendant, a Pisces sun. But we must not forget that the seventh house here can also denote of partners and allies, which may explain why I broadcast on NATO so much after a year. The astrologer that pays emphasis to the Canic asteroid and other yogas and implications paid attention to the fact that their freaking ascendant is in the vicinity. So, so yeah, definitely we're going to see huge emphasis on NATO readdressing anything to do with allies, partners, who is in, who is our enemy, who is our ally. With Jupiter 29 degrees Capricorn, there can be indecisiveness around that. It's ruled by Saturn in the 12th house, so there is a desire for whoever is partnering up with NATO to assist in keeping NATO from being, trampled over, and so on and so forth. There's definitely a nuclear question at hand here in the 12th house to protect, and the funding for nuclear preservation or plantation, nuclear plantation, so to speak. More things that come to mind is, okay, again, the goal of NATO is to best win over a land by actually appeasing the conditions for Uranus in Gemini, which pertains to abolishing slavery and otherwise it will lose land, okay? And that is very important because the entire Gladio operation honed in on the many civil wars that took place at the time, and was, with all things, quite successful as long as women had the right to vote, abolishing child labor, and so on and so forth. Now there definitely are expectations for that to be turned up a notch, and that might not work with global agendas that have other desires, and yet we see even the heads of Palantir kind of having second thoughts about what they created, or the Frankenstein that they created with this competence for not only surveillance but maneuvers. And this is okay. This is putting the entirety. First of all, it's putting a Saturn for both founders in the eighth house of NATO, and that very likely stops a lot of people that could be so easily exposed using Palantir, hacking and leaking, that there is an actual desire for all the sides of the extortion calls to mitigate that, which may even contribute to targeted individuals, and yet the Saturn Neptune aims at the grand leaking before such an event. So we are still with an out-of-bound Pluto in Aquarius, which would be the sixth house for NATO. Powerful, powerful need to be of service to the world, and deal with open enemies, which is the power of technology, and that is very simply put Palantir being both at service to NATO or NATO being at service to Palantir, and this is where the power relation question arises. And and again, it's basically military technology. Okay, so the power of technology and the global power of surveillance being at an open enemy face to NATO itself, which is a land of opportunities to funnel resources and funnel that 5% GDP away from certain type of MK Ultra projects, although NATO was created to capitalize on the civil wars, to create and embellish MK Ultra. However, this dual type of funneling is eating at the national debt and prestige of the United States itself, and definitely doing a disservice to everything that NATO is on the paper set to achieve, thereby popping the bubble where NATO is actually required to defend us from a third world war, or to make the third world war beneficial to those that funded NATO. That actually threatens to be a bubble pop.